In this episode, I had the honor, privilege, and pleasure to have a wonderful conversation with Tasshin. Tasshin is an online pilgrim wandering this precious world for the benefit of all beings. He lives a simple life, dedicated to being of service, supported by the generosity of others. Tasshin has three main endeavors: spreading love, following his curiosity, and empowering others. He works on these through an organization he created called the Service Guild. And straight to the conversation. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Awakened Reflections. I am super excited to talk to the guest today, and the intention of this episode is going to be around content creation and creativity, and maybe a few other things. And I trust that this episode of this podcast is going to really align with those who need it. And yes, how are you feeling today?
I feel great. I was doing some loving kindness meditation just before this, and there's a lot of love in my heart right now. So feeling good.
Awesome. We can start there. What types of meditation have you practiced, and which ones do you recommend or do now?
I've done a lot of different techniques. I've been meditating for like 15 years at this point in different forms. And I did a lot of breath practice, body awareness practice, like noting. And then these days, a lot of my focus is on loving kindness meditation, which I do a lot of lead meditations on, and I've written a book about, and do these dance parties that I run focused around loving kindness meditation. It's one I wish I had started with a bit earlier, but I got to it when I got to it. But for me, it's just a really fun, sweet, playful form, and makes me happy. So I think that was actually one of my big intentions with meditating, was just to be happy. And so when I found that form of meditation that pretty reliably makes me happy and makes my life better in that way, I was like, oh, this is a good one for me. So
Did you find this meditation or did you create it?
Well, it's been practiced really in every major contemplative tradition, but especially I've been influenced by Buddhism, and Buddhism does loving kindness meditation and the Brahma Viharas, and compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. And so I was exposed to it in that context, in a Buddhist context, and then I've kind of made it my own over the years and found my own way into it.
Awesome. So I think I already know the answer, but I also would like to get your perspective on it. Is there a one size fit all meditation that could be beneficial for all of humanity, or does different meditations impact each individual differently?
I think I'm more in the latter school of thought at this point. I've had to find my own way, as I said, with loving kindness meditation, and really with every form of it. And even across your own lifetime, like different things work at different times. So sometimes what was really working for you a few years ago just kind of stops being the focus. And that said, I like to compare meditation to exercise and movement practices. And it's similar in that different movement practices will appeal to different people or benefit different people. But there are also some, major strains and things that are recurring that a lot of people would benefit from or would enjoy exploring. So it is a bit of both, but if I had to decide on one, I'd err on the side of individuality.
What is the power and benefits of being in contact with your body sensations, such as you mentioned earlier, dance and breath work and like yoga and things like that? What's the reason for doing those things?
Well, at least in my own experience over the years, the body has really opened up as this infinite landscape of wisdom and lessons that it teaches you. And there's a lot of intuitive knowledge that's sort of stored in the body that I at least wasn't really exposed to as a kid, that they didn't teach me about in school or anything like that. But the more I learn to feel my body, the more it kind of just reveals different things about myself, about others, about being alive, that some of them you can put into words, and I like to put them into words when it's possible, but some of them are pretty hard to put into words. And despite me trying very hard, and yet if I follow the body's wisdom, things tend to go better. I tend to feel happier, flow more smoothly with myself and others. So that's been my experience, at least.
Are you able to share any of that wisdom that was brought to you, to your awareness through your body?
Hmm. Well, a simple example would be I remember for when I was a kid, I really loved to cry. I would cry a lot. I mean, I had no problems with it. And then at some point, I just stopped being able to cry. And I remember I really wanted to cry. It wasn't, at least consciously, I wasn't opposed to crying. Maybe there was on some subconscious level, but consciously, I was like, why can't I cry anymore? And I remember even as a teenager and a young adult, my grandfather, who I loved very dearly, died. And I was so sad about that. And then I couldn't cry. I just couldn't cry. And it seemed strange to me. I was like, I love him so much, and I'm sad that he's gone, and I just can't cry. And a few different things helped with that, but one of them was I did uh, put a lot of effort into learning the biomotive framework, the Nadera technique that they teach with that, and that kind of re-taught my nervous system how to cry. And in the process, I realized there's something that the creator of that, Doug Tatarin, talks about called alexithymia, which is like the inability to put words to your feelings. That's actually kind of literally what it means in Greek. Alexithymia. Negative lex is words, and then thumos is like the heart. You can't put words to what's in your heart. And that was the case that I had, whereas like I couldn't put words to my feelings, and through that I was kind of disconnected from them. So in the process of reconnection, I learned to have a lot of vocabulary about what I was feeling. That kind of helped me understand myself and also helped me to communicate better with other people so that they could understand what was going on for me in different situations. And it turns out there are a lot of feelings, and I would feel a lot of them, and it's helpful to know that about yourself and to be able to share that with other people.
So that incident with your grandpa, is that okay? It's interesting when you put labels on things. Like, did that serve at a moment through your life as like a trauma? And if so, have you healed from it? If you've healed from it, what techniques or practices or things that you do to allow that those emotions to flow through instead of suppressing them?
I'm not sure that one was especially traumatic per se. I mean, depends how you define trauma,
Mm-hmm.
probably. But I think I was sad and distraught and sort of had normal grief. I don't think it was exceptionally painful or like permanently wounding or something like that. But yeah, I think that technique I talked about, biomotive, has really helped me to show up to things that actually have been traumatic in my life since then, and to move through emotions more smoothly. And um, actually, interestingly, something else that's helped a lot over the years with things that are difficult is um, even putting into art, like visual art that I make, or fiction, writing stories that capture the feeling or the gestalt of something I experienced, even if it's not the literal facts of it. I find that those are both venues that I can share my truth in a way that feels comfortable and in integrity with my values. And that process of expression is something that I've also found really helpful for moving through difficult experiences.
If you feel free to share or feel free to decline, but what are your core values and what's the power of living life through your core values?
Hmm. Yeah. So a couple of years ago, I met my colleague, Mary Bjork, who I work with in the empowerment work that I do. And we've worked together since we met each other. And one of the things that she introduced me to was, um, yeah, finding your values. There's this exercise that she does with her clients that she also introduced me and the people we work with too, which is going through this big list of values, like 100 of them, several hundred of them, and sort of finding, oh, what are my top 5 values? And so, yeah, mine are fun and joy. I want to enjoy my life and be playful. I want to be of benefit and be of service. That's another value. I want to be present and loving. I want to be loving in my interactions, kind. I want to be curious. I want to ask questions. I want to follow my curiosity and what I'm interested in. And then, yeah, I also want to uh, empower others and support them. And that means something specifically to me with the work that I do with her. And yeah, so those are my values. And I think mm, something I've really noticed since I did that exercise with her is um, if I have a decision to make or a problem that I'm facing that I'm finding difficult, that's sort of weighing on me emotionally, either looking at it in terms of my values can kind of clarify of like, oh, this is if I'm like, well, how would I approach this with an attitude of service or with love or curiosity, that often clarifies it. Oh, that's how I should make that decision. And this thing's more important than that, or I should do this instead of that. Or in some cases, it's a bit rare, it will lead me to clarify my values. Oh, I actually care more about this than about that. And once you are in alignment with your values, often those situations become less taxing and emotionally difficult. It becomes clearer what to do, and you move with more ease. So I've really appreciated that Mary introduced me to that.
Have your core values or your values stayed the same, or have they slightly shifted since the initial time you worked through your values?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do shift over time. It seems. For me, it's just been a couple of years, so they've mostly stayed the same. I've kind of changed the words a little bit, or the way that I describe them. Um, I've also noticed that I care quite a bit about freedom and autonomy in a way that I think I have an active question about how that value relates to my existing values. And I think that that's probably connected to fun for me, where it's like something's not fun if it feels forced or constrained. But yeah, that's been an open question that I've had about my values. But I do think they can change over time. Like if I went back to, say, my 20-year-old self and asked what values he might have had, I think he would have given quite different answers to that question, to that exercise.
Yeah, what is your definition of freedom? Because I know freedom is a really deep. It's definitely a value for sure of mine. Because I've done my own versions of doing work and trying to figure out my values throughout life. And freedom is definitely one of those that really resonates and really calls out to me as a value. What is your definition and understanding of freedom?
Yeah, a few different connotations come to mind. One would be a kind of like inner freedom from delusion or ignorance. One would be an outer freedom, like sort of politically. I think I mean something a little bit in the middle of those, like the one that's really important to me, especially obviously I care about both of those, but the one that I really value and prize over others is something that's a synonym for it would be autonomy, of like being able to make my own decisions and having say over choices in my life and how I spend my time and where I spend it and what I work on and that sort of thing. Um, there were periods in my life where I didn't have that autonomy or that freedom, and I feel like being able to spend my days the way that I like and work on the projects that I like and literally live where I like is something that I really have come to value quite a bit and uh, prioritize, even if it means sacrificing other things, like, for example, security or comfort or stability. Those are things that have been less important to me, at least at this chapter of my life.
If someone that's listening to this or watching this podcast episode as well also values freedom, what are some suggestions that you can give them to go towards the path of freedom from like the autonomy of I would say from my definition of freedom, it's kind of pretty close to what you said. First off, it's like the internal freedom, like freedom from suffering. You could say maybe ego and disillusions of the world, and just suffering internally. Then also externally, it's the freedom to do whatever you want to do with the people that you want to do, and have all the things that you maybe materially desire, or just live life the way you want to live it. Essentially, what suggestions would you have to those people? Um, to help guide them to that desire or intention of freedom.
Well, what's coming up is that on the one hand, from the outside, in my current life, I think that you could see me and my life as a product of really immense privilege of not, uh, a lot of people don't have this kind of freedom because they have a house or a mortgage or kids or cars or pets, or, they're in debt and they have to work a certain way because they need to maintain or pay off their current lifestyle. That's true. I have been privileged in those ways, definitely. And also, I have intentionally chosen again and again in my life to be aligned with having that kind of freedom. So I don't own a house. I am not married. I don't have kids. I don't have a car. I, practically speaking, living a very simple life has been very useful to me. I have uh, just a couple of bags that I carry around with me, and then I don't know. I have a two boxes, I think, with my dad that he stores for me. A couple of my friends have DJ kits that I have stored in their houses, but basically, materially, I own very little, in this world, and that's made it possible for me to live the way that I live. I'm not in debt. I intentionally have chosen not to go into debt after, well, I was able to graduate from college without debt, but it's not like I'm taking out some big loan to pay off a house or something like that. That simplicity makes it possible for me to have that kind of freedom and be like, well, I don't really want to work a conventional job. So I think we do participate in our choices, and we're also, of course, blessed with different circumstances. And but simplicity is definitely something that's helped me quite a bit.
What are some of those activities that you do in life currently that you enjoy that co-aligns with freedom?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of that freedom to me means very practically being able to work on things that I choose. And in particular, I want to choose projects and work and collaborators that are fun for me. That's really important because that's another value. I hate that feeling of being like, oh, I have to work on this. I'm supposed to work on this. Somebody said I should work on this. Like a lot of people, I will just procrastinate that or avoid it. And then if I do it, I have to force myself to do it. And right now, really the only time that happens pretty reliably is when I do my taxes each year. I have to force myself to do my taxes. I don't like doing my taxes, but I do want to comply with the US government laws. So I manage to do that. But by and large, I don't have to do very much that I force myself to do. And so yeah, all of my work is work that I aspire to have fun with. And what that looks like practically these days is I'm building an organization called the Service Guild that's built around the three areas of my life's work that I call love, curiosity, and empowerment. It's a little bit like I have three part-time jobs and kind of spend a little bit of time each week on each of those. So love has to do with love and kindness meditation and spreading that in the world. Curiosity has to do with following my own curiosity and helping others to do the same. And then empowerment is basically about believing that people have something like a life purpose, or what I was taught as a vow. And then if we assume that people have a vow, helping them to find their vow and to live their vow, to do service projects that are aligned with those vows. So yeah, I enjoy all of that work and the people I work with and the projects that I get to do with that. And that form of freedom, doing work that I find meaningful, that I find enjoyable, fulfilling, energizing, is precious to me.
So would you say that those projects that you work on are all some type of art form? Is that the way that they manifest or alchemize into?
That's a really interesting question because I think, at least at this point in my life, someone who knows a little bit about me could look at me from a lot of different perspectives. You could be like, oh, he's a visual artist, or oh, he's building an organization, or oh, he's a loving kindness meditation teacher. Oh, I have a podcast that I've heard some of his interviews or something like that. It's like, well, what really holds those things together? What's common to each of them? And for me internally, one way that I like to think about it is that I'm an artist. Yeah, and the specific kind of art that I am is like a life artist. So my life itself is the art that I'm creating over the years, and there are a lot of different mediums that I can use within that. But I don't really see myself fundamentally as a spiritual teacher or an intellectual or a thinker or a philosopher or anything else that you might kind of ascribe to me from my work. I'm definitely not just fundamentally a DJ or fundamentally a music creator or fundamentally a novelist. It's like I want my life to be art. I want to die and be like, yeah, I lived my life well, and I want someone else to say, look from the outside, like, yeah, he lived a really beautiful life that was good. And sure, he made mistakes or wasn't perfect like anyone else, but that was a good life. I'm glad that he was alive and lived the way that he did.
What's the power in identifying with one of those aspects of life, like you said, art as an artist? How does that create like your reality through the identification of it?
Well, I think that frame prioritizes beauty and play and enjoyment and satisfaction in a way that if I was just to identify with any of the one specific activities that I do or mediums that I explore, it would be easy for that to become kind of like grindy or effortful or forcey. Where for example, like I started making visual art 3 years ago, and it was really important to me from the beginning for it to be fun. And one of the ways that I did that was I intentionally made just very bad art right from the start, so that the bar was just so low. It's like, hey, this was still fun to make. I still like this. This was good, and it kind of can't get worse than this. And whatever I do is is great. And so I'm never going to be Michelangelo. I'm never going to be Van Gogh. I'm never going to make the most beautiful art objectively on the historical stage. But I want it to be fun for me. I want to like what I create. I want to like the process of creating it. I want to look back at what I made and be like, oh, I think that's beautiful. That really speaks to something important to me. And that's the standard for me. And I want to have that same standard really across whatever I do. Like, I don't know, I'm writing 2 novels right now. And this is something I've agonized about a bit, actually, because when I was a teenager, I've always loved stories and fiction, and I used to love like the great books and the great American novels. And that was an aspiration I had as a teenager, was to write the great American novel. I wanted to be like excellent and great in other people's eyes, and that sort of teenage part of myself is still there. And he's like, why are you making these? The novels that I write are so weird and so different, and they're not like great, and they're not perfect. They're not these amazing, excellent works. But what matters is that I really like it, and I love the things that I'm creating. And if someone else happens to like them too, that's great. If not, that's okay. I like it. I enjoyed it. And paradoxically, when we follow what's alive for us and what's resonant for us, that's actually the best compass that we have, I think, to being of benefit to others. You can't start with being of benefit to others. You can't start with trying to figure out what other people want or need on its own. You have to, at least for me in my own life, it's been helpful to follow my own compass of like, oh, I feel drawn to this, and this is resonant for me.
So would you say it's more powerful in your life philosophy, you could say, is to help yourself first in order to help the world? So you take care of yourself first. It's kind of like I always go back to this idea of when you're on a plane, it's like your plane's crashing. You got to put the mask on first before you help your kids, is what they say. So it's like you have to help yourself first in order to be a complete service of others. What's your take on that?
I think that's how to put it. I think that is well seen, and my own lived inner phenomenological experience of it is not so much to help myself, but to follow the compass of fun, or some people might call it like aliveness or eros. It's like, what am I drawn to? What's resonant for me? The word fun really gets it the most for me. Is like, is this fun? Is it enlivening for me? And that's if I think about like how to help myself a little bit, that feels like a different frame of like, oh, what are my problems, or how do I make things better? It gets into this kind of like thinky, figure it out kind of space. It's like, no, just like, what's fun for me? What's alive? What am I drawn to? And often that's really mysterious. That in retrospect, some of the things that I felt drawn to at the time, I couldn't really explain consciously why I was drawn to that thing. And yet I've really come to trust that more and more, that if I'm drawn to something, if I'm curious about something, if I feel um, sort of pulled out of myself into something, then that's the direction to go to. And in fact, that like that lived experience of fun or resonance is just this clue as to what will be of benefit, what will resonate for others as well. And so you could put it as help yourself before you help others, but I think for me, it's just really to follow what's alive for you. Or, Joseph Campbell famously said, follow your bliss. That's another way of pointing it out. And that's not really from a like help yourself or help other perspective. It just happens to help you. It happens to help others.
Yeah, like I always understood it as like, I mean, you can call it the law of cause and effect, giving and receiving. It seems to be like a cycle of whenever you help yourself and you help others, it continues to go in that formation if you allow it. Um, this all ties back to one of your big three, which you mentioned was curiosity. Um, were you always curious? Because it's like whenever we think of the word curious, or at least for me, maybe I'm projecting onto others, but I always see I always see the word curious as either one, like curiosity in the cat, just because of one of those things that's embedded in my mind, or like when we see curious, we see kids, perhaps kids from like 3 to 7, when they're always asking why, what's that? What's that over there? What does this mean? And at some point, like after like the age of 7, once here in the United States, when kids get into middle school and the high school, at least for me speaking and the people that I've been around, they start to lose that curiosity and start to question things. They really start to have that inner dialogue pop out more often and that resistance. What do you see? Well, let me get back to the first question before I ask this next one. It's is have you always been curious, or is it something that you developed over time, or allowed yourself to come through you?
Yeah, I'm reminded of another favorite quote of mine. Picasso said, "All children are artists. The problem is to remain an artist as you get older." I said something to that effect, and I think that's true for a lot of things. Like I remember thinking, oh, the same is true for dance. Like all children are dancers, and the problem is to remain a dancer, or to return to it if you've forgotten. And in some ways, in my experience of Western culture, these things can get kind of beaten out of you, or persuaded out of you, or um, you know coerced out of you. And so I think we're all curious. I think it's strange to be alive. It's strange to be human. It's strange to be on this earth. And from the very beginning, we want to figure out what's happening here. And yeah, children do ask why, what's happening, what is this, how does this work? Um, and then for some of us, that gets sort of you get taught that no, don't ask so many questions. Don't try to figure that out. I don't know. And that happens in a variety of ways. But my parents, I'm sure I mean, I'd be curious to hear about their experience of that. But like, in my memory, they always really encouraged me as a learner. They always really helped me to read a lot and to buy books about the things I was interested in. And, they were always reading themselves. So that set a really good example. And then, the other thing that comes to mind is it took me a long time to understand this consciously, but when I went to a public school in Massachusetts and went through that school system, and I just wasn't very interested in that. I kind of put up with it, and I was basically like a B student, and they were like, okay, he's just doing enough to get by. It was like, fine, if I have to do this, I'm not gonna like fail out of school or something, but I'm also not gonna get bothered by it and sort of grind at it. And it's like, why are you teaching me this? This isn't that important. And in fact, in my sense, a lot of the things they were trying to teach me, frankly, weren't really that important. And I wish I had spent less time on them even than I did. But instead, I was just interested in the things that I was interested in. And, throughout my whole life, there would be various things I would get obsessed with, and, spend a week or a month or a year just diving deeply into that. And I think it's been a process of noticing that and really owning that and making it my own, and making that a centerpiece of my life rather than something weird or obscure that I do that other people don't.
Yeah, I totally get that, and especially with the whole school system thing. Um, yeah, it's like for me, one of my favorite things to do, like I'm very curious about. I love learning. Um, Growing up through school, we were forced, or I was forced to study Romeo and Juliet and The Great Gatsby, which they're great, but it's like at the time I'm like, ugh. And that kind of put me in a state of mind where I didn't want to read books of any sorts, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. And then when I was 19, I'm 24 now, so 5 years ago, uh, I got back into books, nonfiction. I went from personal development to philosophy to psychology. And these past 2 years, I would say, has been a really deep dive into researching spirituality, metaphysics, and things like that. And earlier, you mentioned Joseph Campbell and Picasso quotes. Uh, who were some people, mentors, teachers that have impacted you a lot in your life?
Hmm. Well, the first one that comes to mind, maybe not chronologically, but just intuitively right now, as I've been thinking a lot about this recently, maybe because I'm writing novels, is when I was a teenager, I read most of the works of Hermann Hesse. Quite his most famous work is Siddhartha, but I love his other books even more. And The Glass Bead Game and Steppenwolf and Narcissus and Goldmund and Damien, those were all ones that I loved. And I read others that he wrote, and his poetry and his essays. And I just felt a real kinship with him. And a lot of his novels are what are called Bildungsromans, or growth novels, where they show often a young person, but it really could be someone of any age, like kind of coming into their own and becoming themselves. And that was always really inspiring to me. And the kinds of struggles that I saw his characters going through, and later in other Bildungsromans that other authors wrote, it's like, oh, that's really interesting. And that was informative for me. And um, yeah, another big influence has been my spiritual teacher, Surya Foral, who I trained with in my 20s at the Monastic Academy. Um, yeah, it's sort of impossible to describe briefly how big of an influence he had on me. Another big one in recent years has been Peace Pilgrim, who he introduced me to, and She was a mystic and political activist in the last century. She walked across the continental United States probably 7 or 8 times over the last 30 or so years of her life, walking for peace, both inner peace and external peace. She was very concerned about nuclear war, and she was trying to demonstrate a different way to live that didn't result in that war and that hatred. And her writings have been incredibly influential on me, and I call my way of life now a pilgrimage in sort of homage to her.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I never heard the last one you spoke of. That's really powerful. Might have to do my own research on that.
I
Walking
can't recommend her
across.
highly enough to you or other people listening to her. She's not that well known, but her book is freely available both in digital and print forms, and it's not that long of a read, and it's been incredibly influential for me.
Yeah, what's the book called?
It was compiled after she died, so it's all her writing, but it was compiled after she died, and it's a blue book, and I think it's just called Peace Pilgrim or Her Life in Words or something like that. And it's a collection of her writings and letters and poems and songs that she wrote, and yeah, it's. There's also a short pamphlet that she wrote called "Steps Towards Inner Peace" that's usually packaged with it. That's a quite short read. So, yeah.
Awesome. And whenever we learn from these people, usually they present like a message or two, like a life statement or some quotes. What are some quotes or lessons specifically from it doesn't have to be just these people, I guess it doesn't have to be specific, but helps you helps you get through certain moments in your life? Like if you're faced with an obstacle in life, it's like, okay, what helps me get through this? Because usually I always revert back to quotes. That's always my thing. Like my whole entire brain is like an encyclopedia of different quotes to help me navigate through different circumstances in life. And so, what are some of those ones for you that helps you navigate the life your life? Hmm. Yeah, awesome. I mean, love is love. Everyone loves love. Um, what is your definition and understanding of love? Because some people may go straight to thinking the love and associating that with their current partners or watching their parents be in love. Some may go straight to thinking about the idea of unconditional love. Some may go down the path of love equals acceptance or forgiveness. How would you describe just the word love in general.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to take you on a brief detour, which is that I took Bodhisattva vows in 2018, which was now 6 years ago. And that's where I received my name, Tasshin. My given name is Michael, but I received that as kind of a Dharma name. And at the time, I was also granted a sash, because in the tradition that I trained in, you would wear a brown sash. And I had sort of one for wearing about, and then also a formal sash that I would wear for meditation and ceremonies. And I wore that for quite a long time until earlier this year. And then earlier this year, I'd had this sense for a while that I wanted to start wearing something different. And then my friend, Kitten from Twitter, that's her sort of pseudonym, she gave me this jacket. And this, I had imagined something like this, and I was describing it to some friends, and she was like, she handed it to me. She was like, I have it. And yeah, I really wanted a multicolor wizard's coat, basically. And to me, it being multicolor was important, because that's really shown up as a theme in visual art that I've made over the years, sort of having rainbows or multiple colors, multiple textures. And to me, what that signifies is the heart has so much range. I talked earlier about, not having a vocabulary for the words and feelings that I was experiencing, the different emotions and really textures. That's a metaphor that comes up for me again and again. And I've over time found a vocabulary for that. And when I represent that in art, it's like typically I'll draw the heart with multiple colors. And so for me, this word love, I love to use this general word love, which is so broad, which has so many connotations, as you're pointing to, because it has that variety. And I love that variety, and I want to honor that rather than, I can use the specific words. For example, metta, loving kindness, means kind of like universal friendliness or goodwill or well-wishing towards any being whatsoever, anywhere. And I do cultivate that. I will speak about that. I will tell someone how to cultivate that. But I also love romantic love or friendly love, or all these different flavors of love that we can experience and learn. And they have different flavors, they have different properties, but I love them all. And I want to really honor and treasure that.
Wow, that was super powerful on love, powerful love. Um, Something else that you mentioned earlier was purpose, and purpose has been a really um, strong word in my life is trying to figure out. One of the questions I always like asking people is, do you think we were born with a specific purpose in life? Like you're supposed to do this exact thing, and that could be general, the exact thing that you do. Such as in your case, it's like, oh, you're meant to. Your purpose is art and love and things that you do now, or is it discovered or created? It's like, were you blueprinted before we became an incarnation in this body, or is it something that's created or discovered throughout your life? It's like free will or not free will type of. It's a big question.
Well, I want to first come back to curiosity and really point out that I actually, to me, curiosity starts from not knowing and being like, I really don't know. I don't know. And a question that I've had my whole life, like many of us, if not all of us, is like, what are we doing here? And why are we alive? And is there a purpose to life? And what even is this? Why is there a universe at all? And that's always been alive for me as a question. And I really, really don't know. I don't know that anyone knows, but if someone does, I definitely don't know. I don't have certain knowledge. I've meditated a lot. Some people will talk about having memories of past lives. I've never had memories of past lives. That said, despite this ignorance, and again, this frame that we're in with like having a reported conversation, as these people can be like, oh, maybe he knows the answer. Like, I don't know the answer. Maybe you know the answer. Maybe I should be asking you. But that said, the frame of reincarnation is one that's been very useful to me and very fruitful for me. I have come to believe that reincarnation is true, not through any direct experience. There's a few contributing factors that made me start believing it. But in any case, the idea that we reincarnate is one that really informs my thinking about how to live my life constantly. And in particular, this idea of a life purpose of, yes, we incarnated in this life, in this circumstances with some kind of intention, has been important to me. As I said, my teacher, Soryu, shared that with me through this word of vow, and that To me, the important part of a vow is it's less like the idea of a life purpose sounds a little bit like the image of a checkbox comes to mind, where you either check it or you don't, and you could succeed or fail. And I don't think it's quite like that. In fact, I think it's he never used this word, but I would use this word of like it being emergent. It's something that yes, there are things that come in with when you're born, but there's also circumstances that you find yourself in, people you're connected to, the situation of the world that you're in, and those things meet, and that's what creates your vow. That meeting of who you are and what the world is asking of you. That's how he would talk about it, and that kind of emergent property has been important to me. But yeah, I do think we have a life purpose, and given all of that, asking myself what is my life purpose has been a really fruitful frame. And also when I meet people, sort of having in the back of my mind what is their life purpose, and how can I help them with that, has also been a really useful frame to me.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the help yourself first and you help others. It kind of goes back to that scripture where it's like, ask and ye shall find. So if you want to try to find your purpose, if you keep seeking for it, then the answer or answers will come to you along the journey at some point. Especially if it's your main intention, given all your energy and focus and all that good stuff. Um, what have been some of those avenues that you've explored in yourself that you've done artistically? Because I heard you briefly mention that you have a DJ set at your parents. You write, you make visual art. You can say podcasting, a conversation is a form of art from a certain perspective. What dance is another one you've mentioned. What have been some other ones that you haven't mentioned that has provided um, a lot of fun in your life?
Well, the most fun one for me right now, this day, this month, is writing novels, writing fiction. I've been doing that for the last few years. Earlier this year, I spent a lot of time learning how to make music and do music production. Also ended up making music videos. I've made music videos over the last few years, but this year I was able to make music videos of my own songs, ones that I'd created myself with a collaborator, my friend Aspen. So that was really fun. I loved that form of art, making music videos. Um, yeah, I think my fundamental medium, like if I had to pick one, would be words. That has always been one that's been very powerful for me, and I feel like one of my core gifts has to do with words, and um, in a lot of different mediums, really. So fiction, for example, is another way that those words can come through, or tweets, or even actually in my visual art, one of the main recurring themes is not just having it be sort of images or drawings, but working my words into um, the piece and having those represented. So yeah, that's sort of an array of different things. I'd also eventually like to make movies. We'll see if that happens, but I sort of have the aspiration at some point to make movies. I think that's something that I'm building up to, but I would certainly love to explore that as a medium. Um, Really, to me, I think that there's a lot of value of like, if there's a medium that you want to explore, spending a day or a week or a month or just a quarter of a year really diving into that and being like, this is the thing, and just learning the basics of it. And I think there's sort of two axes of making any kind of art. One is just like functional technical skill of like, recently with my visual art, I've been working on building some skills about drawing in perspective and how to use vanishing points and that sort of thing. And that's just a technical skill that you either have or you don't, and you can practice or you don't. But the other thing is sort of like I would call heart, where you have something really that you want to express. There's something you want to say. And I've always had an abundance of things I want to say, things I want to express. And so spending even just a little bit of time learning some technical skills vastly expands the range of the kinds of things I can say and how I can say them.
Do you have like a routine or a process that allows you to do that? Because it's like whenever you're writing a novel, a lot of authors have like a certain process that allows them to get into flow or whatnot, waking up at a certain time, sitting at a specific location, some other type of exercise or routine. Do you have any that helps you get into that process?
Well, with how to put it, I find it's a little bit different with each medium, and the way that I've come to relate to each medium is different. And in particular, actually, with novels, it's really been a contrast for me to. I've written a lot of blog posts over the years, and with that, and I've written several nonfiction books, and those are kind of like you could see them as like each chapter of a book is kind of like a blog post. It's really not that different. It might be slightly different functionally, but it's effectively the same kind of endeavor. And I really have a process for that where it's like, in fact, I literally have a checklist or a standard operating procedure of do this and then to do this and then do this. And I just kind of know if I want to write about something over going through that process over, a day, a week, a month, several months. In the case of one of my blog posts, like 2.5 years, it'll just happen. I'll get to the end. It'll be like, yep, this is ready. I know what that process is. With fiction, I've really found that, at least so far, I think I'm still early in my career as a fiction author, but at least so far, each novel has its own rules and way of being that it wants to come into the world, almost like a set of physics that are proper to it, or a way that it wants to be loved, like it's a child. And um, I'm working on 2 novels in parallel right now, and they're just totally different in almost every way. They're entirely different, and the way that they want to come into the world is very different. Um, and I'm just kind of almost learning from them how to metaphorically give birth to them, and they're very different. So um, fiction in particular seems to defy routine or ritual in that way for me.
Is there a specific state of being that you only create from? It's kind of like the whole balance of, it's not, I want to say it's more like work life balance or flow. It's close to that. Trying to find the right words to bring it out. Um, do you only write your novels, your books, create your art from a place of love? Or if you're feeling or in a state of being that's not in that vibration, do you not create art?
Well, 2 things come to mind about that. First and foremost, just zooming out across my whole life, I think in the love work that I do, one of the ways that I could frame that endeavor on a personal level is that I'm learning how to love more and more across my life and how to embody that more and more. And so, what you spoke about just now, it's like, well, I aspire to feel and radiate, embody, act on love more and more throughout my life. And that's always a principle for me that's been really important is there's always more love available. Like there's infinitely much love that's available to feel or express or embody. And so from that perspective, the amount that we have is finite and small. And it's humbling, really. It's like I could always be more loving. And so, um, yeah, I aspire to get better at that over the years. And I think you sort of like left some clues for me about that, in fact. But um, setting that aside for a minute, something else that's been really important to me is one way to frame it would be like intuition. Another way that I like to frame it, that some friends of mine also frame it this way, is like the muses. This idea that
Mm-hmm.
they're these muses that want to speak through you, that want to channel through you, and that if you're listening to them, if you obey them, really surrender to them, then good things will come, and beautiful pieces of art or creativity or gifts to the world will come through. And another frame is just intuition of like, oh, I have this intuition to do this thing or try this thing or make this thing. And often in my experience, I said this earlier, but the intuitions are strange. Like I really don't know why I'm doing this. If I sort of analytically had planned to write fiction, I would probably be writing sci-fi. I've always loved sci-fi. Um, but one of the things I wrote is like sort of sci-fi, but not really. It's not the kind of sci-fi I imagined. And but instead, I felt called like, oh, I think I should do this, and it's often really weird. And the 2 ones I'm working on right now, it's like I don't really know why I'm working on that. Over time, I've come to have some understanding, but really trusting that intuition, even though it's strange, even though it's confusing. Like, all right, I guess I'm doing this now, and I try to act in accordance with that intuition or in accordance with the muses as much as possible, and even do that all day long. And if there is a kind of state I want to create from, I would describe it as obedience or surrender to the muses, or following your intuition, trusting what's actually alive for you, or as I said earlier, what's fun for you. That's another way to look at it.
Yeah, I think I learned the concept of the muses. I think it came from Stephen Pressfield. He's written some amazing books. He's a big author. He says the muses comes down through him. He kind of channels that and puts it into many different books, fiction and nonfiction, and memoirs and stuff. Um, when you speak on intuition, would you describe it as a feeling, or is it like a, well, from what I understand about intuition is that it's a feeling. Some people associate it with some type of body sensations, maybe like the gut area, or is it like a voice that you hear? Like, how do you experience intuition?
I think it can be a feeling in the gut or the heart, certainly emotional. Often it does present as a thought of a recurring fixation or question of like, huh, I seem to be interested in this or curious about this. It can also be circumstantial, like, just, um, in this conversation, this came about because you tweeted a little while ago, hey, I'm doing my podcast and I want to talk about these things. And it was just like very clearly a yes to me. It's like, I literally didn't know you before I saw that tweet. Um, I don't know if I'd like thought cognitively about what I wanted to talk about. I probably wouldn't have listed the things but it was just my body was like, yep, this is a yes. And so that was yes in my body. It was in my mind, but it was also in the world. It was meeting the world. Like you were there writing that tweet being like, hey, this thing. I'm like, yes, that's a yes for me. So I think it can really come in any of those forms, and probably it's different phenomenologically for different people. But once you get a handle on that, um, it's important to really follow it. And in fact, you can kind of just test it of like making a small choice of like something inconsequential, like which mug to pick. Like there are several beautiful mugs here, and you could be like, oh, I think I want this one. And like you don't need to have a reason. It doesn't need to be for any rational analytical thing. Or like I prefer this one. And you're like, yes, I really would prefer that one. And then you choose that one, and then you act on it. You enjoy it, and the more you can do that at every scale of your life, uh, just the better things go. Yeah.
So would you suggest to always chase or go after those things that you want? So is it like, would you like connect the words like intuition and or bring that into like reality as always like chasing, like always going for your wants? Because it's like a lot of people, it's kind of the concept of like wants and needs. It's like, oh, I need this, or about I want that. So it's like I don't go after that want. What's your relationship between that?
Hmm. I think it does relate to desire, and there's probably someone who would describe it that way. But for me, the words fun or resonance or aliveness or enlivening are really important. Where it's like there's a lot of things that I would say I want that I'm not necessarily pursuing in this way. Where it's like it doesn't really make sense, or um, that's not what I'm steering towards. Even though I might be like, yeah, I want that. If I was just prioritizing my wants, I think I would be maybe living differently than I currently am. For me, it's like um, it's almost like this word explosive is coming to mind. It's like there's an explosive resonance between the situation I'm in and what I deeply desire or resonate with. That's beyond just a want somehow. Someone might describe it that way, but for me, fun or aliveness of like some people like Derek Sivers has this incredible essay, "Hell yeah or no," and it's like, is it a hell yeah? You know, uh, and that's an embodied response to a situation in the world, and yeah, that's you. However you describe it, when you feel it, and that's the thing to follow.
Another big word that you just mentioned has been a really powerful thing for me besides purpose is the word desire. And from my limited understanding of Buddhism and Hinduism and things like that, some like I think it was like a thing of one of the core principles of Buddhism that Buddha spoke about is that desire is like the root of all suffering. And a couple months ago, maybe like even as far back as a year ago, I've really went into a really interesting state of life where it's like, oh, I'm gonna release all desires and just try to be one with the universe, one with everything, and not uh, kind of in this state of like non-doing and just being pure being, and like really deep into that non-duality aspect philosophy of life. But then also something within me always says that it's a good thing to have desires. Um, that I think it was like Bob Proctor. I think I learned the lesson from him. But he's like, spirit is always seeking expression through you through desires. So it's like always go after your wants. Um, what is your definition or understanding in the role of desires in life? And is it okay to suffer, or are you not supposed to suffer from going after desires?
I have been exposed to a lot of Buddhist thinking and teachers and practice, and yet I really don't feel like I'm an expert in Buddhism. That said, to my understanding, um, the root cause of suffering in Buddhism has a lot to do with attachment. It's not just the desires, but the attachment to those desires, or in particular, a phrase that my teacher would use, which I believe came from other sources, but this is sort of into English, is like attachment to concept of self, which could include not only yourself, but also others, or even other, like self sort of broadly conceived. But it's not self that's the problem. It's not the concept that's the problem. Similarly, it's not a desire that's the problem, I think. It's the attachment to a concept of self. It's attachment to a desire. That's where the suffering comes from. So you can, I mean, I don't know, at least in my experience, for example, you can not think for a while. You can learn to not think. You can diminish your sense of self. But, thoughts come and go. They'll come back. A sense of self will come back. Maybe some people have permanently obliterated thinking of any kind whatsoever, not just verbal, but other kinds as well. Maybe people have permanently obliterated a self, but at least in my experience, that hasn't been the case. But really, those aren't the problem. Thinking's not a problem. Self is not a problem. It's attachment to who you are, or concepts or desires, that's a problem. So that's on the one hand. The other thing that's coming up is I found the concept of like the Tao from Taoism, or a word that I like to use for it in English these days, which whether it's the same thing or not, someone could probably contend, but it's a resonant one for me, is the life force. And what does the life force want of us? And where is the life force taking us? And where are we going? And in my experience, if I fight the life force, then things go poorly, then I suffer. If I surrender to the life force, then things go well. I'm happy myself, and I'm also flowing with the world smoothly. And that makes me want to do more of that kind of surrender to it. And that surrender to it isn't this sort of disembodied lack of desire, lack of self. It's very much for me, it's been an experience of coming into, look at this person. I look at myself on this camera. I've got this beard and this hair and this weird jacket, and all these words about who I am. It's like really owning my sense of self and who I am and how I want to show up in the world in a way that's proper to me. That's almost like Tasshin shaped. I love this adjective, U-shaped. Shaun shaped or Tasshin shaped. Whatever the person listening's name is. George shaped, Sally shaped. Really understanding who we are. Like, you wouldn't try to get a pig to be an elephant or an elephant to be a pig. You want the pig to be a pig and the elephant to be an elephant. So what does it mean to be Shaun? What does it mean to be Tasshin? What does it mean to be George or Sally? And really acting in accord with that. And that will involve desires. That will involve a concept of self. And the challenge is to not be attached to that, not to be fixed, not to try to force the world or yourself to be something that it's not. It's actually a process of flowing and change and adaptation, and really dancing with the universe rather than fighting it.
So what I'm understanding is that you are saying that it's okay to have strong intentions and desires, but also being able to surrender to that and accept, or maybe I'm putting words in here now, accept the outcome or the reality, what happens from that.
That would be a way of putting it, yeah. Another way that practically has been, I have had some really intense desires like anyone else. And sometimes they're very particular, or I experience them as very particular. But often you can find deeper levels of that desire beyond the particularity of it, of like, there's a lot of people who want romantic love, for example, myself included. You might imagine really like marrying someone, or having a relationship with someone or something like that. And it's like, well, that's fine. That's not intrinsically problematic. But what is underneath that? Is it a desire for connection? Is it a desire for safety? Is it a desire for comfort? Is it a desire for feeling seen? And can you follow that desire rather than the particular circumstances in which it manifests? Because that may not be in the cards for you, like this particular thing. Like, no matter how much I want a Lamborghini, someone may not walk in here right now to give me a Lamborghini. I also don't really want a Lamborghini, so I'm good. But yeah.
That makes one of us.
That makes one of us, right? I would drive a Lamborghini right now. Yeah. I don't really want to own one. So anyway, but yeah, like, what's the core of the desire underneath this particular circumstances that may or may not be matched by the reality you find yourself in?
So it's about getting to like the root reason behind it and accepting and loving whatever format or way that it takes form.
You could put it that way. I think I'd say what's the heart of the desire? What's the core of the desire? What is its truer form beyond a circumstance? And how can you follow that or meet that or honor that in whatever circumstance there is? The circumstances may not match that, but perhaps you can honor that desire and be led by that desire, even if it's not doesn't turn out the way you expected.
Before we conclude the ending of this episode, what is one message that you intuitively feel that you need to share with the world at this time and moving forward in the short future?
There's something I've been puzzling over that feels salient. How to put this? I guess I feel called to invite whoever's listening to a thought experiment, which is uh, if you really believed that reincarnation was real and that you'd lived before and you'd live again after this life, how would that change your life? And similarly, if you believed that this life that you are in had a specific purpose or you had some kind of a calling, however you want to relate to it. As I said, I like the word vow. What do you feel it is that you're called to do? What is your purpose for being here? If you put that frame on for a minute, how would you live your life? How would you choose to spend this day? How would you choose to live your life in the year ahead or the years ahead? What would that lead you towards that it might not otherwise?
That's powerful and beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for speaking with me and for having me on, Shaun.
Yes, Tashin. Where can people go to help support you for your work and whatever you do, to contact you? Where would you like people to go to connect with you?
Yeah, my home on the internet is Tasshin.com. I don't have a physical home, but I do have my home on the internet. And one of the fun parts of having an unusual name is that you can have just that domain name. You know, I couldn't get Michael.com, for example, but I can get Tasshin.com. So that's TASSHIN.com. That links to me all over the web. I have a Patreon, so if people want to support me, that's one way to do so. It links to the Service Guild, which is the organization I'm creating. You know, I'm on Twitter and YouTube and Instagram and all over the place. So it's all there, Tasshin.com.
And I'll have all of those links or the link to this website in the description and show notes. So, and thank you for this lovely episode. I am eternally grateful for you, and I can't wait to see how this impacts the world.
Thank you, Shaun. Thanks for having me, friend.